I lived with my brother and parents in a flat in the north part of the city. Due to a legal procedure, we were evicted from that, so we split up. My parents and brother went to live in a flat near that area, and because I had no money to pay rent, my aunt offered to let me live in a second house that she and her husband had. This house was located in the east zone of the city, a bit far from my work and the area that I used to live in for more than 20 years. However, it sounded like a promising way to start my independence. The house is located in a zone that is not very safe, and the suburb around the house is a bit shady. But it's worth to say that it's a really big house with a big metallic door, big kitchen and living room areas, 4 double bedrooms, 2 complete bathrooms, an extra service room, and a little chapel. Second side note, because my uncle studied to be a priest, and then he studied psychoanalysis. He was a very well-educated man, and he knew a lot about black magic, tarot, exorcisms, and that kind of stuff. This house was used as the consultory house, so anything related to therapy or any other kind of stuff that he needed to sort out was dealt with in this house. So the first night I arrived, I had a spooky feeling about it. I went into my room and had difficulty sleeping. Then about 11 o'clock, I heard 3 massive bangs that came from inside the closet. I shit myself and called my aunt. She said it was because of the neighbours, but to be honest, the sound was quite loud to be the neighbours. Every night I came in from work, I felt quite agitated and anxious. After closing the main door, I had to run upstairs to put the lights on until I came into my room. Once inside my room, I usually avoided any other areas around the house. The only other area that I would go at night was the bathroom. Some creepy noises were common during the night. It was also common to hear a window opening, which was even more scary. One day, my girlfriend stayed overnight with me, so she went to all the rooms in the house, checking everything just to find anything spooky. So she found a cassette with what supposedly was a therapy session, but when we played it, it was the following. My uncle was speaking with a woman, and this woman was saying that she had a headache. Suddenly she said, "The voices in my head are trying to say something." Then my uncle asked what they were saying, and completely out of the blue, the woman started speaking with a really deep, guttural voice, and said something in a language that we couldn't understand at all. Then my uncle asked her to explain herself, and the guttural voice said something else, and then the cassette stopped. After this situation, more creepy things started to happen in the house. Suddenly, a lot of big and creepy spiders and scorpions were seen around just the upstairs rooms. One night, when we were playing cards, something moved the main deck from the middle of the table, to the left corner of it. I barely sleep. I started to leave the side lamp on all night, and I used to sleep from 2 or 3 a.m. until 5 a.m. There was a really creepy feeling around the house. There were some avoided areas. The main ones were the kitchen, the chapel, and the room where we found the cassette. If you were there, you could easily feel that someone was behind you. Finally, I said all this to my cousin, and she explained to me that her father, my uncle, did one kind of exorcism in that house, and that he knew that something was wrong with it, but for him, it wasn't too bad. All the audios were just to prove that this kind of thing was real and relatively common. I lived there for just 2 months, but felt like I was there for ages. As a funny fact, the only people that used to go there regularly were my uncle and my girlfriend, but my aunt just went there once when I was moving out, and she stayed in the car park area the whole time. Some months after I moved, I asked her why she didn't go to that house regularly, and she said that she doesn't like it because she knows the house is haunted, and she started laughing. Growing up in a Christian household, I knew the battle between good and evil existed in our world, whether we saw it or not. Going to church on Sunday school every week, I was taught about the Word of God and how He wants us to live. But in Sunday school, I was never taught that my faith would make me a target for several demonic spirits that would eventually attack me and my family for 3 years of my childhood. What started as an evil spirit attaching itself to me eventually culminated into 2 separate events. The first event is a situation that won't be included in this story. I'll be trying to make the retelling of my story as quickly as I can, but the basic gist of the first event was a situation where the entity that followed me everywhere ended up physically attacking several of my classmates at my friend's birthday party. The second event was at my church, where my sister was maliciously attacked by an unseen force, and she was pinned to the floor by members of our church as they prayed over in a large group. That I will explain, for it was the event that ended a series of intense spiritual battles that overtook my family's life. In 2014, my family, along with 11-year-old me, resided in Tucson, Arizona, for a job opportunity my father was given to start a new business. Our original home is in Colorado, where I was born and raised. We needed a change in our lives, so we left the Rocky Mountains and landed in the desert. Needless to say, I never got used to the number of cacti I saw wherever I turned. Come spring break, my family took a trip to Avondale, Colorado, to visit my cousins. The house my cousins stayed in was quite literally in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but open fields and corn stalks. The nearest neighbouring house was half a mile down the dirt road. As if my cousin's house wasn't creepy enough, it was so far out in the country that nighttime was especially dark. I always remembered having an uneasy feeling about the property itself. Don't get me wrong, it's a beautiful house, not to mention its huge size. It has 2 floors including a basement with a modern layout and cement exterior. The house was so big and so isolated, you'd be able to see the house driving several miles away. My cousins were the only family to have lived on the property, so any possibility of deaths on the land was out of the question. The house my cousins lived in had no conceptual reasoning to be as creepy as it was. It wasn't until one night my cousins and I were about to go to bed. My cousin Savannah told me why she didn't like sleeping in a room at night. Every few nights, she would see a little girl standing on the edge of her bed and stare at her. Just the thought of that scared the shit out of me, and I couldn't blame her for not wanting to sleep in a room. As a matter of fact, Savannah had taken the opportunity to sleep in the living room while we were visiting. Me, Savannah, and her friend Taylor huddled up in the living room and treated it as a fun little sleepover. When Savannah told us she was seeing that little girl, we ended up staying on the topic of scary stories. This is when Taylor told the story of Courtney Road, a story that would soon become very personal to my life. Courtney Road is an actual road that sat about 10 minutes away from the house, and there were a legend spread that a man went crazy in the house he lived in with his family. The old man savagely murdered his wife, son and daughter and skinned the family dog. The old man was so out of his mind, he hung his daughter's body on a tree branch that hangs over Courtney Road, so everyone who drove past could see it. In a fit of rage, the old man lit his house on fire, and now all that remains of the property is the outline of the destroyed walls and a basement. Taylor and Savannah told me that they had both gone to the property at some point and confirmed all that's left standing are the remains of the fire that burned down the house. At some point, I asked if anything had happened to them when they went to the property, and they responded with a list of things that people they knew had experienced in the past when they went. Things like still seeing the little girl in the pink dress hanging in the tree her father tied her to, or seeing the family's white dog chasing you away from the property. But the worst one for me was seeing a tall man in a black cloak that showed itself to the people that visited and continued to haunt them in the future. But knowing these were just stories to freak me out, I passed them off. Eventually, we stopped freaking each other out and fell asleep. Savannah and Taylor slept on the only 2 couches in the living room, leaving me to sleep on the carpet floor with a blanket and pillow in front of the couch Savannah was laying on. Around 12 at night, I woke up from a heavy sleep. Everyone else was sleeping as well. Savannah snoring and Taylor stretched across the couch in a way that's sure to give her back problems. When she wakes up in the morning, I sat up from the floor and peered into the kitchen to look at the time on the oven. Sure enough, it was only a few minutes past 12. I looked around the house and I sat on the floor wide awake. The weirdest part is that I didn't even feel uneasy or that someone was watching me. It wasn't until I looked toward the foyer and saw him standing there. My heart sank to my stomach as my brain connected the dots. Standing in the centre of the foyer, in front of the main entrance, was the figure of the tallest man I've ever seen in my life. Abnormally tall. He was so tall, he was hunching over and staring at the floor. I was unable to see his facial features as he continued to stare at the ground. I even contemplated if my mind was making up what I was seeing. But the more I stared at him, the more real he became. His entire body was covered in black, with a hood that sagged over his head, almost as if he was the perfect embodiment of the Grim Reaper. His clothing made him look almost cartoonish, with his hands at his side as he continued to stare directly at the door. When it became clear that's what I was staring at, a coldness flowed through, with a sensation as if the blood in my veins had turned to ice. I quickly tucked my head under the covers, hoping that whatever it was standing there didn't notice I saw it. But it became clear that it was an attack towards me. The voice of a man spoke through the blanket and into my ears, as if his lips were speaking directly above my head, speaking in a language that sounded like gibberish. I couldn't understand what he was saying, but I knew in my heart that his intent was to hurt me. I could feel it. It took strength out of me to snap out of it and scream for Savannah to wake up. Several times I screamed for her, each time getting louder and more urgent. By the third time I shouted, the voice above me had stopped, and I heard Savannah's groggy voice asking what I needed. I quickly hopped onto the couch beside her and cried as I told her and Taylor what had just happened to me. I didn't leave the couch for the whole night and didn't even go back to sleep. I sat in shock and fear, watching television, waiting for the sun to come up. I didn't experience anything supernatural again until we had gone back to Arizona. To sum up the next few months of my life, I began needing to have white noise playing while I went to sleep, or I'd hear the voice of the tall man call my name over and over again. I also slept with my closet light on because I was scared of being surrounded by complete darkness in the circumstance I saw the tall man again. The worst nights were when I'd wake up and feel my bed mattress vibrating and breathing. For years, the entity continued to make its presence known, not only at night, but even throughout the day. Daytime was when I'd notice shadow figures running around my house. I had confirmation that I wasn't just making it up, because my dog Harley would react to what I was seeing, either by growling at the figures or following them where they'd run off to. Flash forward about a year later, my mom and dad had decided to get a divorce. My mom took me and my sister, Jessica, back to Colorado, where all of our family reside. This time, we moved to Colorado Springs and stayed with a family friend until we had enough money to get a place for us to stay. By this point, my sister and I had been tested and diagnosed with PNES, post-non-epileptic seizures, a mental illness that the spirits that followed me would soon take advantage of and target my sister. Being extremely financially unstable, not knowing if we would find a place to live, while battling my father in court for custody of me and Jessica, my father had a lot on a plate. And that was the perfect opportunity for the entity to strike. What started out as convulsions, Jessica's seizures soon turned violent. When Jessica had an episode, she began screaming for help and crying in agony. There was pain on her face. Jessica would explain to our mother that during these episodes, she would see several shadow figures surrounding her, holding her down and whispering horrendous words that threatened her. Jessica was being oppressed by several demonic spirits, and her mental health took a toll. At the age of 16, Jessica had attempted suicide more than once, and a doctor was convinced she was showing signs of schizophrenia. She was eventually sent to several different psychiatric hospitals throughout the next few months. In the short amount of time we'd have Jessica home with us, we would attempt to go to church every Sunday. But as expected, Jessica's episodes would become more intense and violent than ever. Her episodes got so bad, we would need to leave halfway through the service. My mom, desperate for help, would cry on the way back home. The grace of going to church had been stripped from us. My sister was persistent in trying to return to church as much as she could. But the day that all hell broke loose was when Jessica stayed for an entire service. When the service had ended, Jessica almost immediately collapsed on the floor and slipped into another episode. A member of our church and close family friend, Wayne, had quickly run to Jessica on the floor to help her. Wayne wasn't prepared when an unseen force had attacked my sister as she lay in his arms. Jessica screamed the most painful and blood-curdling scream I've ever heard. A scream that I'll never forget. She was sobbing for someone to help her. The attention of a group of church members quickly rushed over to Jessica and saw what was happening to her. It didn't take them long to surround Jessica like a swarm of bees, place their hands on her and pray in a powerful way I've never seen before. Several church members began speaking in tongues, holding her to the floor as Jessica wailed and struggled to push them off her. The episode continued for at least 10 minutes before Jessica had become unconscious and lay limp in Wayne's arms. A few minutes more of praying went by and Jessica had finally regained consciousness. She cried about what had happened. She was embarrassed. But most of all, she was crying tears of joy that their prayer had stopped the attack on her. That was the last time Jessica's seizures were like that. She still has seizures to this day, but they transitioned back to the convulsions she had when they first started. And eventually, so did the experience that pursued onto me at night. It wasn't until recently, when I was talking to my mother about my experiences as a child, when I realised that they had stopped the day of Jessica's last episode in the church. That's when I knew it was important for me to tell this story, for people to understand that evil in this world exists, and how serious of an issue it is. This is a story my mom tells all the time, because I have a special connection with everyone around. I always thought this had something to do with her being my mom, but other people have told me the same. That they feel as if they've known me for their whole lives, and particularly calm when I'm around. This happened when I was 4 or 5 years old. My mom was in charge of that year's senior class, and it was tradition in the school that they would make a road trip to a ski resort right on top of the Andes, between Chile and Argentina, for a whole week. With some parents and me, since my dad was working in the north back then, and I couldn't be left alone. During the week, we had a great time with the class, but I would usually go to a hotel to play in the third floor lobby with a blonde friend, as I always told my mom, and that I liked to play with him, because he had old toy cars. And she said it was okay because she could hear us play in the lobby and hallways from our room. My mom thought he was just another kid staying in the hotel with his family or one of her students. That was until the day we had to leave, when she spoke with the hotel manager. My mom asked her if I had been much trouble for the other family staying there, with the noise of both kids playing around the hotel, to which the manager went white and said that we were the only group staying in the hotel that week, since it wasn't skiing season yet, but that it was known that a British kid had died there during a blizzard in the 60s, and that the kid is their company all year round. And that he's always been very friendly, but never played with others. Now it was my mom's expressionless face that went white. She said thanks for everything and hopped on the bus that would take us down the mountains. During the trip, she asked me about this playmate I had at the hotel, and I gave her a full description of a blonde boy wearing green pants and jacket, with a funny black tie and a yellowish shirt. I also told her that he was always felt cold, except when I invited him to play with me, and that he had cool old toys. I started to think I was in trouble, but she told me there was nothing to fear, that everything was all right. We have pictures and videos of that trip, but to this day, I cannot remember anything about that trip. The first experience is actually more akin to several experiences, all wrapped up in one house. When I was much younger, around 12 or 13 I believe, we moved into a house in a nice little neighbourhood near the school I was attending at the time. It was a ranch-style house, which means instead of being multiple stories, it's just long. The front door was on the left side of the house, and immediately to the right of the door was a large panoramic window looking into the living room. The living room led into the kitchen and my sister's room, which contained the attic. From the kitchen, if you went left, you went into the dreaded basement, and if you went straight, you'd go into the backyard. And if you went right, you would hit the bathroom, my room, and my parents' room in that order. Now I should mention, this house was built into a hill, so half the basement was sticking out of the ground, and my room was technically on the second floor, off the ground in terms of height. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, I'll start with the actual experience. It was small things at first. Objects would never be exactly where we left them. The dogs would stare at things that weren't there, and every once in a while, we would see and hear things like shadows or knocking and scratching. It seemed as though when we agreed to just ignore it, the activity got worse, much worse. The dogs would bark and sometimes even pee in fear of things we couldn't see. Objects began to be thrown. My father even told me that he heard two little girls trying to get his attention and felt them tugging on his leg like a child would. The worst part was the basement. Cliché, I know, but it's true. The second I stepped onto the stairs to go down, this overwhelming fear of dread and fear and despair would overwhelm my body, and it felt like I was paralysed. I saw humanoid figures shuffle along the floor, heard angry yells and shouts. One time when I was coming up from letting the dogs out, I even felt something angrily grab at my ankle. It's safe to say I didn't go down there unless I had to. The activity only got worse as time went on. I began hearing disembodied voices speaking to me late at night, footsteps when I was home alone and the dogs were with me, even seeing faces and figures out of the corner of my eye. I began sleeping with a fan and a noise machine to cover up the noises so that I might be able to sleep properly. They only got louder. The bathroom was another creepy place. If you crossed the bathroom at any point after 9 p.m. and before 6 a.m, you would see what looked like a man with a blacked out face staring at himself in the mirror. I remember blacking out at random, having visions of myself dying in gruesome ways, and even waking up in the air, for lack of a better term. Everybody in the house but me saw a doppelganger of myself on multiple occasions. They said it looked like me. But there was always something odd about it, like it had too many teeth, or a scar that shouldn't have been there. My parents still refused to talk to me about what they found in the attic, and honestly, seeing as we moved out shortly after they went up there to store the Christmas tree, I'm fine with that. This next house is an apartment complex we were staying at due to needing a cheap place to live and it being available. I was about 13 or 14 at the time. It had 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a small bathroom and a living room, all in a square shape. My room was in a corner. My parents' and sister's room was in the corner right next to me. The bathroom was in between mine and my parents' room, and the kitchen and living room were the other 2 corners. Now, the activity in this house didn't happen as often per se, but it was still disturbingly strong, as if the lack of quantity was replaced by quality. The bathroom had this weird feel to it, almost as if someone was watching you go. And we've heard laughs come from there when we're all in the living room. My room seemed to be a hot spot for activity. I heard footsteps, my things would get chucked across the room, and the most notable experience yet took place in this house specifically. Remember how I said I slept with a fan and a noise machine, so I didn't hear any noise or anything like that? Well, apparently, whatever was in that house didn't like that, because I'm sitting in the bed with my head under the covers when my fan and my noise machine gets physically switched off, as if someone reached over and turned them off. And I don't mean the power went out and I was delirious. It was 10:33 p.m. My phone was plugged in and still charging, and it got deathly quiet. Like eerily quiet, when you know something is horribly wrong, but you can't fathom what it is. I get this urge to look out of my window, and there are 2 glowing, floating, transparent figures staring straight back at me. I couldn't even scream. It was like my throat had seized up. I jumped backwards, letting go of the blinds and concealing the window again, and he was under my covers for so long, I started to sweat. Finally, around 11:30 p.m, I gained enough courage to shine my flashlight, turned my noise machine and fan back on, and immediately went back to bed. That was the single most notable experience of my life. The next house is actually the one I live in now, from age 17 to now. When I graduated high school, I moved into my grandmother's house as she had a spare room and lived within walking distance of where I worked at the time. All you need to know about the layout of this house is that my room is literally right across from the basement door, which is convenient, as it's where I spend most of my time, but it's also where the majority of the activity takes place. Down in the basement is a massive open room, which in the back left corner leads to another big room with a wood shop in it. The back right corner, however, contains the hotspot room. I've been spoken to in there, had things thrown at me, I've been touched on the neck and told to get out of my domain, all kinds of crazy stuff. My tech setup is downstairs as well, so I've been playing before, had something thrown at me from behind, and turn around just to see that the door, that I damn knew well I had shut, with the light on, swing open with the light off. The one at that house was scratched the letter N into my neck, left scratches on my back, and even attempted to drag me down the stairs once as I was leaving. My house has been haunted all my life. It started in the apartment I lived in as a kid, but it followed me to where I'm currently living. In the past 10 years, I've experienced more paranormal activity than most people have in their lives. It started with an attachment I had from using a Ouija board at 11 years old. Since I've so many paranormal experiences to share, I'm gonna limit this to the things that have taken place in my current home, with a focus on the more significant things to take place here over the years. I'm 21, but when I moved into my current home, I was 13. I was living with both my parents, 4 cats and a dog, and now it's myself, my dad, my girlfriend, 3 cats and a dog living here. The history of the house isn't very important. We bought it from a family. The woman that lived in the house had been moved to a hospice where she passed away, and her kids were selling her condo. Her name was Helen. That is as much significant history as there is to my current home. Outside of that, it seems that the entities in our home aren't necessarily attached to the location as much as they're attached to us. A little background on the spirits in my house. I know Helen is here. She's been heard by multiple people. She has a distinct old lady perfume and a calming feeling that comes along with her. We also have unknown number of spirits or entities in the basement. I have a hard time explaining them because I don't know if there are multiple male human spirits or one inhuman spirit, making it seem like more than one. But whatever it is feels dark and masculine, if that makes sense. Helen mainly stays upstairs, and whatever is dark typically stays in the basement. The main floor is typically the more poltergeist type activity. That being said, now into some specific experiences. One day, I was probably around 14 at the time. I was in my bed late at night responding to Snapchat streaks, but being a teen laying in bed, makeup probably off, I didn't feel like sending pictures of my face or really putting any effort in. But I also didn't want to send a black screen, so I was taking pictures of my bedroom door because our hall light was on. After snapping and sending a few photos, my camera started struggling to focus. It wouldn't take the picture because it just kept trying to focus. Finally, the picture was taken and a dark black figure was peering in at me in the photo. It was out of focus, and of course, I freaked out. I looked up and saw nothing, so I snapped another photo, and that one came out clear, and there was no figure. At that time, I'd say it was the beginning of things taking a turn for the worse. A few days passed, and I had gotten 3 scratches down my back in the shower. My aunt had heard about what I was experiencing, and had a friend who was a Wiccan priest. I will say I wasn't necessarily open-minded to a Wiccan. It seemed like bullshit at first, but this man had told me that there are always ways we can open portals between our worlds and others. Sometimes intentionally, but not always. He told me that candles give off a pure white light, but when set in front of a mirror, that light doubles and turns impure or dark. It's hard to explain, but I understood it as candle alone equals good, candle in front of a mirror equals bad. He said if you have a candle in front of a mirror and look into it, that can open a portal to a darker dimension. Again, as he was first telling me this, I was thinking bullshit. But then I remember just days before, I had seen the figure in my bedroom. I had taken a photo sitting in front of my bedroom mirror, with a candle damn near in my lap. He told me to throw a sheet over the mirror without looking into it, and to get rid of it, or remove it or whatever. My dad did so, and the second the sheet covered the mirror, the power went out, only in my bedroom. The rest of the house was fine. That's when I started to take the stuff more seriously. A little while passed, and things seemed a little less dark or aggressive, but something was definitely still there. That's when the event occurred that caused us to call a priest to come bless our home and myself. I had been home alone one day and had an experience that's hard for me to explain. Other people will simply say I was possessed for a few hours, but for me, it's more confusing than that. I have a lapse in time, in memory, where people are telling me I did things I don't remember doing. I remember being on FaceTime with my best friend. I had walked into my upstairs bathroom, which is weirdly a hotspot for activity in the house. The same room I got scratched. After walking in the bathroom, I don't remember anything else until hours later, so what I type from here until I snap out of it is told to me by witnesses, if that makes sense. My best friend said while on FaceTime, the lights started flickering in the bathroom and I just stopped talking and was staring up ahead past my phone. My friend asked what was wrong and I responded with, "I can't leave. There's something blocking the door." Right away, she knew something wasn't right and told me to just go out, but I guess I ended up hanging up the phone. We had another friend who lived like 2 blocks away from me, so my best friend called her and told her she needed to check on me. When she got to my house, she looked for me everywhere. Upstairs, main floor, basement, and looked in every room, but I was nowhere to be found. Just as she was coming down the stairs to leave, I was standing in the middle of the main floor. If you walked in my house, you couldn't have missed me. So she asked where I came from and that she was looking for me. She said I responded so calmly and eerily, it wasn't like it was me talking. I told her I'd been in the bathroom, and she said, "No, you weren't. I just looked there." Once she said I completely changed, and she couldn't tell it arranged me. I told her she needed to leave, and I even said, "You aren't welcome here." Being a 14-year-old girl talking to one of her best friends, that's definitely not like me. She tried to argue about leaving, but apparently, the more she did, the more aggressive I got about getting her out. So out of fear, she left, and her and my friends just kept trying to call and text me to snap me out of it. 3 hours passed, and no one knew what I was up to. I posted a picture on my Snapchat story of myself in the mirror that was covered, the effing portal mirror, with the caption saying something about it being time to stop being scared, or stop running, or something super creepy. The next thing I remember is sitting on the couch, and the best way I can describe it is like this. It felt like waking up from a nap, except I didn't remember falling asleep, or even going to sit on the couch. After that, we had done a little more research and talked with the priest and Wiccan. I ended up finding out I had an attachment that I created with a Ouija board at 11, and then only strengthened with the mirror portal. I was blessed, and so was the house, and for a long time, things were better. A couple of years ago, my family, which consists of my dad, mom, little brother, uncle, aunt, and their 2 children, as well as my other uncle and his wife, were at church on a Sunday afternoon. It was just a regular Sunday mass, not anything special. What I remember happening was that all of a sudden we left in the middle of the service. We were walking out and going to the parking lot, and I remember that my aunt was hysterical. She was crying and hugging my dad. My dad almost in tears as well, and I was around 7 at the time, so I was just really puzzled and confused. But I eventually forgot about it and went on about my day. Years pass, and the topic comes up at a family gathering. What really happened that day still creeps me the fuck out, and how my family just talks about it now, as if it weren't such a weird thing to have experienced, is beyond me. But anyways, on that Sunday, my family was leaning on one of the walls of the building, facing the priest who was giving a lecture, just because it was a really busy day and there weren't any seats left. About 30 minutes into mass, my aunt notices a guy who looks almost identical to my deceased uncle in the crowd. She's stunned and elbows my dad to show him what she's looking at. The man she was pointing at was fortunate enough to have gotten a seat, and he was in one of the rows on a bench just sitting there. As my dad is staring at this guy, puzzled and in complete shock, the guy looks up at my dad, makes eye contact and smiles, and then he just looks back at the priest who's giving the lecture. My dad freaks out, and so does my aunt, who noticed that the guy was an exact copy of my deceased uncle. The guy all of a sudden gets up, excused himself from the people that he was sat to cross in order to get out of the row, and he walks towards an exit. As soon as he does, my other uncle walks on after him in an attempt to catch him up to apologise for creeping him out. My uncle claims he followed up to him to the exit, where he turned a corner and ended up losing sight of him. Now that's already weird, But my uncle also claims he noticed a scar on the man's left forearm that he knew for a fact my deceased uncle had from a firework accident when he was little. Ever since then, they never really saw the guy again. Some family members of ours have claimed that they've seen someone who looks exactly like my uncle, but who knows if it's the same guy we saw that day. For the vast majority of my childhood, my family has been very near to or within haunting circumstances. When I say haunting, what I mean is this stuff always had very little to no explanation from a realistic perspective. And though I've gone back and tried to get the evidence we had of this stuff at the time, it was many years ago, and I can't seem to find it. To preface this, I want to mention this. I have 3 siblings that I grew up with. I'm a middle child with an older brother, a younger sister, and another brother. I personally believe that children, most specifically of the ages 5 to 10, have a very acute sense for the paranormal. Some of you may know what I'm talking about. It's kind of like a sixth sense where you can walk into a room and it has an energy about it. Sometimes not even paranormal. For example, I've walked into a friend's home before, and the moment I stepped in the doorway, I was overwhelmed with a feeling of goodwill and happiness, despite feeling very neutral the entire walk over. And I've had experience the opposite, where I've walked into my own home and suddenly I'm overwhelmed with a feeling of complete dread, danger, and like I'm being watched. A feeling that remains constant and becomes normal to you if you live in a haunted home. This sense definitely starts to dissipate as you grow older and more distracted with life. When I was 7 years old, give or take, we moved in with my mom's boyfriend. He was the kind of person to befriend many of the neighbours, mostly because he was out in his garage every night playing music and drinking, and the surrounding people were like-minded. One such neighbour lived just across the street, adjacent to us, and I'd gotten pretty close with their son. We'll call him T. I spent a lot of time at their house, and it had that before describing a constant feeling of dread. Unbeknownst to me at the time, their house was constantly getting activity, and it was causing problems with T's parents, I believe. His mom was fixated on it and was constantly recording the home and audio, and I guess she was obsessive. T's dad was a military man and more of a skeptic, and I guess they clashed about this often. She had a lot of EVPs and recordings of their dog reacting to activity. The most convincing of which was a video of her in bed, woken up by the dog growling at the hallway. Her dog's behaviour kept escalating to barking and just going crazy. In the video, she reaches for a handgun. I think in their nightstand. Then you can hear in a low, growling male voice say, "Are you ready?" She stopped showing us the video here, so I suppose that's all she had captured that night. But for the most part, I never experienced anything in the house beyond what she showed us and our family. But one night, T was over with his fam and my younger brother, and I agreed to head back to his house to grab some toys or something. I can't remember. It's nearly dark outside, but it's just across the street, so no big deal. The house, however, is almost completely dark. We go to his room with very limited visibility, and once inside, T begins telling us that sometimes while he's falling asleep, he can hear someone running around in the attic above his room. The attic door is just above his bed. The moment he finishes his sentence, as if on cue, it sounds like something heavy and loud starts sprinting through his attic. Needless to say, we run out of the house. They eventually had someone cleanse the house and do a walkthrough with the family members, and also my mom. I still remember it was difficult for them, but mostly I remember a story my mom still recites to this day. When they were doing the walkthrough, they eventually arrived at T's room, where she said the energy was the darkest and most dreadful for her. As she begins to cleanse this particular room, T's mom says something like, "I'm gonna hurl." And my mom, clear as day, over her shoulder, can hear the same growling male voice say, "Good." She said that she could feel that whatever it was took pleasure in their pain. But for this house in particular, I'll be straight up, I didn't live in it. There's not much to say about it besides what's there. However, when my mother and her boyfriend broke up, we moved into our very own haunted house. I have a lot of creepy stories from this house. It's not a very remarkable home. It's not a very creepy home, just a regular house in a suburban lower middle class neighbourhood. But we lived there for quite some time, and the activity was bi-daily mostly. Nothing that went on there was explainable. Nothing. To start, when we moved in, the backyard was pretty crappy, with no grass, weeds everywhere, a wooden patio on the side of the house, and a concrete one at the back. In the concrete patio was the name Sarah with a heart drawn around it, presumably done when the concrete was still wet. I began to have a lot of dreams of I thought it was this girl, Sarah. She wore a white gown and a dark hair, and I didn't think much of it until my mom mentioned she's been having similar dreams. Once we had that house fully furnished, all of my siblings and I had rooms upstairs, and I shared the largest room with my younger brother. This room had the most activity, and it would kind of branch out into the house with this room being the worst. I started having very vivid, terrible nightmares here, of my family being killed in the night, in unexplainable ways, while I could do nothing. The one I remember the best was them all being suffocated by vines that grew out of our beds, while I was the only one awake, and being restrained by said vines. I started to remedy this by listening to music while sleeping, and after several nights of music, my younger brother started complaining to my older one that I needed to stop singing at night. One night, my older brother came in and woke me up to tell me to stop singing. I hadn't been using the music that night. I told him I wasn't, and he said he could hear it from his room. I thought this was odd, because I'd barely been falling asleep when he came in, and was still conscious enough to know if I was singing. When he left the room, my younger brother from his bed said, "Who were you talking to?" And I told him, to which he said, "You never came in the room, silly." And I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. There was another time my mom promised she'd buy me a game if I cleaned my room that night, which was good enough for me. I remember that the entire time I was cleaning, the immense feeling of dread, and that I was being watched was almost suffocating. It was too much, and I took frequent breaks and complained to my mom. Surprisingly, she understood, because everyone in the house had been having similar experiences. But she shrugged it off nonetheless and told me to stop if I wanted to, but if it wasn't done, she wouldn't buy the game. I was committed, so I continued, and after that conversation, while I was cleaning alone in my room, something told me in a shrill, deep, almost demonic voice to get out. I went to my mom and told her what happened, and she told me to stop for the night, out of concern. The nightmares still continued in this room, and I had begun to lose sleep for many nights in a row. I was stressed, but soon my older brother was moving out, and I'd have his room, and I was kind of relieved at the thought of this. Before we moved out, there was another incident wherein I watched the movie The Ring with him downstairs. When we finished it, he was going to watch the second one, and for some reason, he never disclosed, he really didn't want me to see it with him. He sent me upstairs where I sat in the loft playing Mario Kart on the Wii, and that feeling returned. It's unmistakable and very clearly different from the feeling of being creeped out. You know something is there with you because its intensity is so much higher. I complained to my brother 3 separate times that I didn't want to be upstairs alone right now, and he didn't listen. After the last time I came back upstairs and the bathroom light, fan and shower were all on, I didn't even turn them off. I was too scared. I just sat on the stairs waiting for the movie to end. At this point, a lot of us kind of lived in fear of our own home, and tensions were high. We were always on edge. I got into frequent arguments with my older brother, and I developed general anxiety disorder and was up several days in a row because of insomnia. There were many more little incidents, but I can't cover them all, just the major ones. Eventually, my brother moved out and I took his room. My mom took our old room with her new fiancé and used the master bedroom downstairs as an office. My younger brother temporarily shared it with my younger sister. Now, my mom has the nightmare room. She has several stories of whispering and the cats acting very strange, but one always stood out to me. So one night she's asleep and she hears something open the door and then feels a weight pressed down on the bed by her feet, like someone sat on it. She assumed it was one of our cats until she heard heavy breathing. She said she was too scared to open her eyes right away, but eventually she did and nothing was there. The weight on the bed suddenly lifted and she woke up by now. my stepdad and asked if she'd explained what she just did. I had developed a very serious fear that someone was going to break into the house, and my insomnia only got worse because of it. I'd stay up for sometimes 4 days in a row and just stare at the light under my door. Sometimes I'd sit at the door, afraid someone would try and open it. Often I saw shadows move in with the slit under the door, but it could have just been my mind. I attribute my mental state at the time in part to the house and whatever was in it. You would have to be and live in it for years to understand. Whatever it was not friendly. It didn't want us there and never became content with us being there. I have since revisited the house after coincidentally sending mail to it and spoke with the people who live there now. They seemed very on edge and would only open the door a sliver to talk to me. And I wonder if this is what we were like when we lived there. I'm a 25-year-old law student who moved back in with their parents after college. Recently this year, I've been starting to feel like a presence follows me around. I feel it whenever I lay down, in particular, my bed. When I lay down, I feel like something, like a child or small dog, follows me into bed and circles me or moves around me. I swear I feel the bed and springs move, or that there's a pressure difference, or something is off about the weight distribution. I feel like it's an animal that I can't see. This is not limited to my home. Once, when I was spending the night at a friend's as I rested on the couch, I felt as if his dog came up to my ear and began sniffing. But when I recalled and looked, nothing was there. This happened several times. I do feel a sensation as if I'm being touched. Sometimes I also feel as if the thing is sniffing me. I'm also under a lot of stress because of school, so I feel that this might be stress-induced hallucinations, but man, I can't get over how I genuinely feel like something is following me. I can be a jumpy person, but also, my house apparently has some history to it. When I was a baby, my siblings decided to play with a Ouija board in what is now my room, and allegedly, my siblings purport they made contact with a spirit. Almost everyone has seen some sort of light, audible phenomena, apparition, shadow people, things moving on their own. For a while, none of this happened, only every so often. But now, similar to my older sister, I sometimes swear I hear my mom call out for me clear as day. Only when I approach my mom, I found that she never called me. Sometimes I think I hear my little sister calling me out for me, saying, "Mom's calling you." It may be worth mentioning that my mental state is not the best, because I don't like living at home, plus school and apathy. So I am in dire need of a mental health services, or do we need to bless the house again? Okay, I need at least some form of idea what happened, or closure that this happens to anyone else. So I have a dog. Her name is Sagan. Sagan is a Canaan dog, but from Google image, she isn't a brown fur coat. She's black and white. You genuinely can see the excitement in this dog. Always hyper, well-trained, smartest dog I've ever had. She's even smart enough to open the door to our room when she wants to go downstairs and eat food and come back up. And overall, just a glowing puppy. So I live with my boyfriend, and we both own Sagan. Me and my boyfriend stay up late for his streams for Twitch, and we always play COD or Minecraft or whatever. Don't remember the time exactly, but I'll say 2 a.m. Sagan was in our room next to my boyfriend's setup, watching him play. He was hungry, so I went downstairs to make noodles for him. I remember opening the door, and I looked at Sagan and talked to her in a baby voice. "Want to come down with me, Sagan?" And usually, if she wants to go, she runs outside the door and waits for you at the start of the steps and walks you down. If no, she sits down and stares. This time she sat down, which answered my question. Walked down the stairs, nothing out of the ordinary, and when I finished, I headed toward the stairs with a bowl in hand. At the start of the steps, I see Sagan lying in the middle of the stairway, which shocked me, because usually when she changes her mind or checks up on you, she goes downstairs and runs to me and just follows me everywhere, every step. I didn't hear the door open if she did open it, But I ignored it and excused it to me just simply not hearing her open the door anyways. Sagging, she looked tired. I looked at her and she never slept downstairs. She always slept with us, so I was kind of worried, but not too much to freak out. Just more like, she's tired, and maybe she just wants to lay there. So I pet her and talked in a baby voice and said, "Love you." And I expected the door to our room to be open. Like I said, Saga knows how to open the doors, but not close them. So seeing it close, I just assumed, alright, my boyfriend closed the door. When opening the door, fucking Sagan jumped on me, hyper as usual, and I was so startled. I did a 180 to look at the steps, and that dog I saw was gone. I didn't hear footsteps or shuffling or something going down the stairs. I just didn't see anything, and it happened so quick, it's like this shit teleported as soon as I opened the door. I asked my boyfriend if he let Sagan out of the room or heard Sagan open the door, and he said no, and that Sagan was in the room waiting for me the whole time. I told him what happened, and he just said maybe I'm tired. But the thing was, our sleep schedule was completely fucked, where we sleep all morning and wake up at 10 p.m. to start streaming. So being fully awake and seeing that really left me speechless and just lost a train of thought. Only thing I can think was, what the fuck did I touch? I petted her and felt the fur. I touched the thing that wasn't even my dog. He just said, concerning, but laughed that the house was haunted and made more jokes like, Sagan, do you have a twin? Don't get me wrong, I laughed too, but I was still startled. I went back downstairs to double check everything, and while in the kitchen, I was just scaring myself and it gave me goosebumps. And after that, I tried to ignore it. But the more I think on it, the more it just doesn't sit right with me. So I couldn't be too tired, since I was fully awake and fully aware of what was happening. Couldn't be my eyes playing tricks on me, since I got face to face with this and touched it. It looked like my dog, felt like her, and it's just such a trip. And I needed an explanation for it. Last year, I had broken up with the father of my kid back in March of 2021. We had been together for 6 years, never married, and our kid was 2 years old at the time we split. He took his life a few months later, in October of 2021. In the apartment we used to live in, I could see my kid talking to the wall. Or once, I thought I saw someone in my room, and when I put on my spirit box to see if I could hear anything, a voice came out saying, "Hey," in his voice. I didn't hear it at the time, but my new boyfriend was recording and caught it on video. I moved out the house and got into a bigger apartment, since I wanted a 2-bedroom apartment for my kid, and my boyfriend and I. We've only been there since September of this year, and I've started noticing strange things. Once, I heard a voice come from my child's baby monitor, calling out, "Hey." Another time, my boyfriend and I were fixing something in my closet when we heard something like keys jingling, but couldn't find the source. My kid has woken up crying a few times, pointing at the bedroom door. Next to the door, I have a small bookshelf with a picture of my son and his father, encased in resin, and his ashes in a necklace displayed. Something we think we see a head poking from behind a wall in our bedroom at night, and I'm always feeling like someone is watching me at all times, even when I'm alone. Even our cat once sat and just stared at the hallway to our bedrooms and wouldn't look away, which is kind of unusual for her. For Halloween, I put out a table with a few decorations, and since I'm a practicing witch, I put one of my Corot decks out. I set out for a few of them spread out with the death card on top, since I knew it would creep out my friends. I had it in the upright position with the other cards. The death card in the upright position means the ending of a cycle, change about to come. I had left the house for a few hours after setting it up, and no one had been home at the time. When I came back, I noticed the card was still in place, but reversed. Death. When it's upside down, its reversed meaning is the fear of change and holding on to the past. It was the only card that was reversed. The scariest thing that happened was one night my boyfriend and I were asleep in bed. I was pressed up to my boyfriend's chest when I felt him shift, so his back was facing me. Suddenly, I started having sleep paralysis. I felt a hand grab my wrist, and suddenly another hand grabbed my other arm. I couldn't speak or scream. I could feel it in my throat trying to get out, but couldn't make a noise. I could barely breathe. I hear a sing-song voice that sounded familiar and say, "I'm going to get you in a minute," over and over. I look up to my sleeping boyfriend and I see his head turned around 180 degrees and he has a serious look on his face. It scared me enough to wake up. But not for as long as I plunged into another sleep paralysis. It was almost the exact same things. More hands grabbing my arms and singing that it was going to get me. The only thing that was different was that my boyfriend didn't turn to look at me this time. It was getting harder to breathe. I started trying to dig my nails into my boyfriend's side. My fingers were the only thing I could feel moving. I was sure I was going to die, and all I could think of was that my ex finally had me. That he was getting revenge for me breaking up with him. At the same time of my sleep paralysis, my boyfriend was having a nightmare that someone was kissing me, and that a bunch of hands were trying to touch me inappropriately. He was trying to fight off the hands to get them to let me go. He only woke up when he heard me struggling in my sleep paralysis. I'm not sure if it's all related or linked to my ex, but since October marked a year after everything happened, and that's when the activity started picking up, part of me believes it's him. I'm not sure what to do, but I think he wants to harm me. In the 8th grade, I lived next to my grandparents. I would visit them pretty often as I'd go over there to eat, hang out, or to see my uncle's dogs. Friday after school, I went inside my grandparents' house to greet them. I looked for my uncle, which was nowhere to be seen. Being young and adventurous, I went back outside to the backyard. My uncle had 3 dogs. One was really quiet and was barely even usable, but at a certain point view, you could see him. Going up to the cage is usually greeted by him, but this time I wasn't. I was about to leave until I heard him walking up to the cage, panting and looking in distress, and more drained than usual. His eyes were pitch black, and his paws had more dirt on his white fur than usual. He looked like he'd been trying to dig pretty deep. The air felt tense and still. The other animals were quiet, and the wind was barely blowing. The feeling brushed off as I was just happy to see him. I pet him, even checked if he had food, and he did. Even water was even spilt, meaning he'd been drinking it recently. He was a French bulldog, so I wasn't thrown off by how dirty his paws were, or the mess he'd made in his cage. I left after a few minutes of thinking nothing of how black his eyes were, or how dirty his paws seemed. Going back inside, my uncle greeted me. He then asked me what I was doing before he'd got there. I told him I was petting Kilo, the French bulldog. He laughed, saying, "You're joking, right?" I said no, putting a blank face as to why he would even ask such a question. His face turned pale. He gave me a look as if he was concerned for me. Being confused, I just said, "Okay, I'm going to go now." Hours passed by, and I visit them again, only to go into my uncle's room to ask him what he meant by my joking. He gives me a long blank face, and then proceeds to tell me that he's been dead and cremated for 2 weeks already. I thought he was playing a prank on me, since I was young, but he says, "If you don't believe me, look at my dresser." He was there. His ashes are in a small box labelled with his name and date of when he was born and when he died. It's been 4 years, and the only thing I wonder is what I was petting that day. Ever since that day, I haven't been able to pet a dog comfortably.